بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. I mentioned to you several times some narrations that are mentioned in the introduction of Sahih Muslim. And there are 2 points that Imam Muslim, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned in the introduction of his book of authentic hadith of the Prophet, Sahih Muslim. He has, unlike Al-Bukhari didn't have a complete introduction to his book. He just went into the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas Imam Muslim, in his book, he has a whole introduction to hadith and narration and weighing and investigating narrators. He has this section. And I want to preface what I'm going to talk about today by saying I'm asking all of us to prepare ourselves to raise our levels of Islamic education, right? That's one. To prepare ourselves to elevate, raise our levels of Islamic education. As a people, we need to start taking Islamic education like we take our secular education, those who are serious about it. I mean, that's a problem in our community anyway, but some of us are real serious. And we aim for higher education in the secular world, and we study and we review and we take it serious. You know, there are some of us in here with master's degrees, several master's degrees, PhDs, you know, all kinds of certification for medical fields, maybe some doctors, you know, in their fields of trades. They went to trade school, they learned a craft, you know, some kind of skill. You know, we put in work, right? We need to do the same thing for the deen and more, because all of those things that I mentioned, they're going to end when you die. And all of us are going to die, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Every self is going to taste death. So we're all going to die. None of us are going to be here forever. And some of us, people can't wait till we die. I'm one of them. There are people, they can't wait. They would have hoped the corona would have knocked me out so they can go ruin everything I'm trying to build. Subhanallah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Allah, may Allah help us to help ourselves. Anyway, that's a side thought. But all of us are going to die, and we should be certain of that, right? We should have certainty about that. Allah said, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. Worship your Lord until death come to you. And what did Allah call it? Al-Yaqeen, death. right? Death. Yaqeen, wa'bud rabbaka hatta ya'tiyaka al-yaqeen. Worship your Lord until yaqeen, certainty. Certainty means al-maut, death. Worship your Lord till death come to you. Right? So we have to realize that we're going to pass, and we got to work until that time comes, right? So with all of our worldly things, when we die, it's it. That's the end of it. But for our religious practices, there are works of the akhirah, of the hereafter. They're going to go on after we're past. We have passed, right? After we leave this world, those hasanat and those rewards from acts of worship are going to follow us. So keep that in mind. And since that is the case, let us do the best we can within our capacity to acquire and implement the knowledge of this religion, right? We mentioned in the Ghazali class that there are 3 aspects to that. Al-ilm, wa-ta'allum, wa-ta'aleem. Knowledge, learning, and conveying, right? So we have to go through those stages. And I'm saying all this to say, let's raise the bar in our Islamic education, right? Let's stop treating our religion as if it is insignificant, unimportant, and it doesn't matter how we approach it, right? Let's not do that. Let's approach it with some seriousness. Let's approach it and give it its value that it deserves. And so when I'm speaking to you about different things, I'm not speaking to you as someone who is deficient in intellect, right? You can't understand. So we're going to leave this. We're just going to give you what's for you. No, let's elevate our learning, our levels, and step by step, we get more knowledge. And let's not be half-baked Muslims where we really don't know our deen, you know? One Orientalist, you know, Orientalists is those people who write and talk about Islam, but they're non-Muslims. And he said something as an observation in one of his talks. He said, the meaning of what he said was, in my studies, I discovered, because they study Islam, that the most unlearned people of Islam are the Muslims. That's a heavy statement. This is a non-Muslim Orientalist, right? He writes about Islam. He teaches Islam. That's what they do, right? You know, and they get grants and endowments to go study Islam, right? He said, I discovered in my studies that the most unlearned about Islam are the Muslims. That's deep. In other words, they don't know their own religion. They don't know their tradition. They just go through forms. And I remember when I was studying in Lebanon, my teacher, we used to go looking for books. I'm a lover of books. So we would go looking for books. And we would go to the Muslim libraries and bookstores. They were a mess. You couldn't find anything. Just no respect for the knowledge. And the sheikh was showing me something. And we would be looking for books. They would be all over the place. We go to certain places. You find books that shouldn't be there, books that should be there, not there. Just a mess. He took me to the Orientalist Library in Beirut. They have their own, where they got manuscripts, where they steal all of our stuff and they keep it. Because they're serious. They got government support and religious endowments, research endowments, and they're serious about this stuff, right? You know, when they have wars, the first places they hit, you don't realize this, is the libraries of the people, and they take the libraries. So when they're doing these raids, they be taking books, manuscripts, and all of that. And they end up in these libraries all over the world, in Paris, in Europe, in Princeton, Yale, Harvard. They got books that the Muslims don't got that are our writings, original manuscripts. So the Sheikh took me to this Orientalist Library in Beirut, and because we were looking for certain books. He said it's here. And when we went there, it was like immaculate. They had library attendant, manuscripts. These are handwritten books. You're not published. You just tell them what you want. They bring it out, photocopy, very organized with our stuff. These are non-Muslims with all the Muslim books. And he said to me, he said, they have a greater concern for our heritage than we do. But they use that to destroy us, and we take it lightly. I just want you to think about that. That's a deep statement. And he showed me, I watched it with my own eyes. And I thought about that. I was like, it's deep. It was quite depressing, to be honest. But what I want to get out of this is let us raise our bar, right? And it's happening where within Islam, they give you a few fancy colored books with nice covers, you know, pamphlets, really, and then deprive you of the real Islamic library. So you're not aware and say this is sufficient for you, while they destroy the tradition from within. We have to raise the bar of learning. It's extremely important. So that's my point. Let's raise the bar. Inshallah. So that's why we read in all these biographies. So these two statements in the introduction of Sahih Muslim, I'm going to give them to you real quick and we're going to move on. Because I got to learn, because I have to learn to manage time better. But I have so much I want to give and not enough time to give all I want to give. May Allah help me to manage the time better. Imam Muslim, two statements I want you to write down. One of them, and I told you them before, so you have them. I'm just give you the name. One was said by Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Abdullah, I gotta get in there. Abdullah ibn Mubarak. And the other was by Muhammad, I'm gonna give you the names. Ibn Sirin, right? These were two great scholars from the time of the Salaf. And Imam Muslim, in his introduction, he quoted both of them, and I want you to memorize these statements. He quoted Abdullah ibn Mubarak. And Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he said, Al-isnadu min ad-din. Walau la isnada, laqala man sha ma sha. He said, Al-isnad, which is the chain of narration, from where you get your knowledge, how your knowledge reach you, from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher, all the way back to the Prophet. He said, Al-isnadu, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, Al-isnadu, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, min ad-din. Walau la isnad, laqala man sha ma sha. The chain of narration is a part of the religion. Without it, anyone can say whatever they want about the religion. Right? If we don't have that chain, you can come up with the most astonishing things because no way to check it. When we have that chain, we can check the statements. We can check the narrators. We can know the lives and biographies of whom you relate from. We can know their strengths and their weaknesses. And did they learn from this one and did they not learn from this one? And you're going to see this today when I talk, when we go into our reading of a biography. With the chain of narration, that's how we know that. Whenever a person cannot produce their teachers, that is a red flag for you. When they don't know how they receive their knowledge and they don't know the biographies and lives and studies and teachers of their teachers, that's not a good sign. Why is it not a good sign? Because it means they're missing things and they're going to have to fill in those gaps with something. And usually what they fill those gaps in is with their opinion or with their false understandings or mistaken notions, because they're missing something. It's a gap, right? So that's one thing. That chain of narration, without it, anyone can say whatever they want. That's one statement. Muhammad ibn Sirin, he said, Inna hadha deen, inna hadha al-ilm deen. Fandhuru amman ta'khudhuna deenakum. He said, verily, this knowledge is the religion. This knowledge of hadith, this knowledge we're learning, it is the religion. Inna hadha al-ilm deen. Fandhuru amman ta'khudhuna deenakum. So look well from whom you take your religion, right? That is the whole reason we have the science of isnad, of narration, so that we know from where we get our knowledge from. We know where we get our knowledge from. That's why we know that the report of the Prophet ﷺ is sound or weak or false because of these chains of narrations. Because we can examine the men and the women in the chain to ensure that they're properly conveying the religious knowledge. So take those two things and let us make that apart. So we need to learn about the scholars. Why? Because the scholars are how we learn our religion. We don't make it up as we go along. And you got to understand this. Everything we got, yeah, Muslims, oh believers, everything we got or we have from the religion, whether it is the Quran and the Sunnah, hadith of the Prophet, or any books, all of that has reached us in 2021 or 2020 or whenever we were born up to this time, 2021, through men and women. None of us met the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and none of us was there when the Quran was revealed to him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the way we learned about it was that trustworthy men and women conveyed it to us from generation to generation to generation. And that's why the Muslim Ummah, the nation of Muhammad, represented by its scholars, always ensured that the most knowledgeable, the most pious, the most trustworthy, the most accurate of those men and women, they took the religion from. Do you understand that? It's extremely important. And don't rush me, please. Allow me to give you what is needed. Be patient. Even if we have to go a little longer, I'm trying to manage the time, but I have ideas that I need to get across to you, that you need to understand so the other things are easier. Is this clear? Is my point here clear? Does anyone have a question about what I just mentioned? It's extremely essential what I'm trying to convey to you. If you get this point, well, it is much easier to teach you. If you don't get this, it's much more difficult to teach you. One of the biggest challenges of our teachers, and I'm talking about in our education system here in America, is that the children and parents don't know the value of education. right? So the teacher struggles to teach the children the value of education. And a lot of that comes from the parents not understanding the value of education. So the teacher not only has to teach the subject, but has to teach the child why it's important that you get an education, period. And that's a struggle. And we're going through the same thing in Islam as teachers. You got to teach the person why they need to learn. And that's difficult. That's very difficult. All right, Baron gave me ijazah. I'm taking his authorization. Take your time, Imam. Teach the way you know how. Brother, I am with you. How many of you second that that statement? If you all accept, then we get ijazah from Brother Baron, and we can move as we need to move. We live in a time where the student tells the teacher how to teach, which is totally bad adab. So if we go back to that book, The Etiquettes of Learning, you follow your teacher. We never, when we were learning, go to our teacher and tell him how to teach. We learned, we memorized what he taught, and that was the end of that. And you see the result. We're able to teach. Tell you. Because we do live in a democracy, so I got to make sure everybody's with us. Now I'm having fun. Tell you. So we got that point is clear, right? I want to go to the Reliance of the Traveler. Right? On page, and I need you to get your notes because I'm going to show you some things. Page 1100. So we have a biography today, and I'm going to try to run through this as quick as possible while still giving the details I want to give. So we're on X341, the biography of Asuyuti. Now, go ahead.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Suyuti, B3.2, is Abdul Rahman
You know,
ibn...
when they put these numbers before, like B3.2, that is the first place he was mentioned in the book. So that's all that recognized. So if you see like before each after the name of each scholar, they have that little location. That's the first place he's mentioned in the book. Okay, go ahead.
is Abdul Rahman ibn Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad ibn Sabiq ad-Din Jalal ad-Din al-Suyuti, born in 849, 1445. He was a Shafi mujtahid, Imam, Sufi, Hadith master, Hafid, and historian, a prolific writer who authored works in virtually every Islamic science.
Here, I want you to pay attention who we're talking about. As-Suyuti, right? He was born in the middle of the 9th century, Hijra. He was a Shafi'i scholar whom they said reached the level of mujtahid. You notice these terms, we talk about that. A qualified legal expert at the high levels. He was a Sufi. We talked about this too. Remember, we talked about Sharani yesterday. He was a Sufi. And he was before Sharani, Abdul Wahab Sharani. He was Sufi. He was a Hafid, Hadith master, over 100,000 Hadith by heart with their chains of narration. He was a historian and a prolific writer, authored works in virtually every Islamic science. Imam Asuyuti, in the history of Islam, is one of the most prolific writers ever to touch a pen. It is estimated, not just his published works, we're talking about manuscripts, works that were lost, that he authored around 1,500 books. And the scholars, they explained, they said that if you wanted to take the body of writings of Imam Asuyuti in the different Islamic subjects and all these different subjects, he, from the time they said when he was in his mother's womb, this is how deep they went about it. When his mother was pregnant by him, from that time to his death, he would have had to write, if you spread it out through his life, from the time he was in the womb, 100 pages a day. Subhanallah. And he didn't start writing until he was around 17, right? When he started writing books. And he wrote around 1,500. Most of them are not available today. We don't have them. They're just publishing one with about 800 of them. That's coming out soon as a new collection, compendium of his writings, like 800 books of small rasail, treaties, some books. And I want to give you a joke. Sheikh Imaduddin, rahimahullah, let us recite Al-Fatiha for his soul. Al-Fatiha. He used to always, we used to sit a lot. We spent a lot of time together, years, right? And he writes, one of his skills is he's a writer, Sheikh Imaduddin, rahimahullah. So I used to push him, let's write this, you should write this. We can research, we can put it together and make this book. Do this, do this. And I have a lot of his books that, inshallah, I'm going to start putting them out, right? I have almost a storage full of his books that we did, and we just didn't put them out, like far as on the market. But he used to say, to give you, he would talk about it, writing. And he has one book that's around 800 pages, right? An-Najum al-Lamia. And he would think of himself, just us as we're talking, that he was the Asuyuti of our time. And he would make the comparison. He said, even Asuyuti didn't write this subject. But emphasizing how much Asuyuti wrote, right? You cannot find an Islamic subject almost that Asuyuti didn't write a book about. He even wrote a book about the virtues of black people. Subhanallah. He wrote a book about the virtues and the superiority of black people. I have the book written by Asuyuti. He touched everything. Subhanallah. And that is to give you a rank of scholarship. He touched almost everything. Now, go ahead.
Raised as an orphan in Cairo, he memorized the Quran at 8, then several complete works of sacred law, fundamentals of jurisprudence, and Arabic grammar.
And here, notice, he was raised as an orphan. That means he didn't have mom and dad all of his life. But Allah gave him his own supervision from Allah, direct supervision over him. And what was the thing? 8 years old, he memorized the Quran. Done. We should strive for that. That my teachers used to say, in the traditional Islamic environment, if a kid reached 10 years old and they didn't memorize the Quran, they thought something was wrong with them. Subhanallah. Said in the original days, when the kid reached 10, if they did, in the early days of the Islamic, when it was at its height of scholarship, if the kid didn't reach by 10, they didn't memorize the Quran, they thought they had something wrong with their mind. 8 years old, Quran done. We should strive to say, listen, in our communities, the kid cannot be 13. They cannot reach puberty and not have the Quran by heart. That should be a goal for all of us. That's just like drinking water. No of our child, we strive that all of them have a great portion of the Quran, if not all of it, by the time they're 13. Right? So that means we need to invest in schools and training and teachers. You start to see the difference. Asuyuti, 8 years old. Naam, go ahead.
After which he devoted himself
I'm
to
sorry.
studying.
And memorize books, right? In almost every science. Not only writing, but he had books. He was a walking library. Books memorized, all in his mind. Naam.
After which he devoted himself to studying the sacred sciences under some of the foremost sheikhs of the time in each discipline, among them Siraj ad-Din Bulqini, with whom he studied Shafi jurisprudence until his death.
This is
Sharaf,
wrong. We want to fix it. He didn't study with Siraj ad-Din al-Bulqini. He studied with his son, Alamuddin. Saleh ibn Siraj ad-Din al-Bulqini. Right? And it is important that you pay attention to names, right? Siraj ad-Din al-Bulqini, as we see, you go to the page before, Siraj ad-Din is Umar ibn Raslan. He died in the year 805, 805, Siraj ad-Din. Asuyuti was born in 849. It's impossible that he studied with him, right? It's impossible. He could not have studied with him. He died in 805. Go back to page 198 quickly. Just the next page over, right? You got it?
yes, X333.
Yeah, read Siraj ad-Din al-Bulqini quickly. Just read through it.
Siraj ad-Din Bulqini, W12.3 is Umar ibn Ruslan ibn Nusayr ibn Soli Abi Hafs Siraj ad-Din el-Kinani el-Bulqini, born in Bulkina, Egypt, 724-1324. A Shafi Mujtahid Imam, Hadith master, Hafiz, and judge. He was educated in Cairo and gained recognition as the foremost representative of the Shafi school in his time. In AH 769, he was appointed to the judiciary in Damascus. He authored a number of works in Shafi jurisprudence, Hadith, and formal legal opinion, and died in Cairo in 805, 1403.
And we go over back to the Asuyuti was 849. So who was the teacher of Asuyuti? The main sheikh of Asuyuti was his son, Alamuddin al-Bulqini, whose name was Saleh. So, and he died in the year 868. 868. So when he died, Imam Asuyuti was 19 years old. So I want you to keep in mind Alamuddin Saleh al-Bulqini. He died 868 after Hijrah, AH, right? He was the sheikh of al-Bulqini, of Asuyuti, and he was a student of his son. He had another brother, Jalaluddin al-Bulqini. They were great scholars of Shafi'i fiqh. And they were like at the level of ijtihad, great scholars. But look at the age when the sheikh died. Imam Suyuti was only 19. 19, and he was already an expert in Islamic jurisprudence at 19 years old. He had reached that high level of scholarship in fiqh, and he was only 19. So you see how serious they were about education? 8 years old, memorized the Quran, study. By the time he's 19, he's with the leading scholar in fiqh of his time in Egypt, who is the son of the great mujtahid scholar who is a judge in Egypt and Damascus, who was before that a student of the great scholars like Taqiyuddin as-Subki. Remember all these names? Now you're starting to see the connection from generation to generation. Great scholars. Now, so
Sharaf,
that it shouldn't say Sirajuddin. It should be Alamuddin, his son, Saleh. Not Umar al-Bukini, Saleh al-Bukini, the Saleh ibn Umar, the son of Umar. That is the Sheikh of Asuyuti, not his father. And that's why we said knowing times. Knowing times is extremely important because our knowledge is chains of narration. If the chain is broken, then the narration is weak. You cannot trust it. Naam. So fix that. That is not Sirajuddin al-Bukini. It should be Alamuddin al-Bukini, the son of Sirajuddin. Naam.
among them Alam Adim Sali ibn Siraj ad-Din al-Bukini,
Mm.
with whom he studied Shafi
And he
jurisprudence.
died in what year? I put it there. Did y'all see it? What year did Alamuddin al-Bukini die? 868. Right? So mark it in your notes so you have it. Because when we start studying further and we're dealing with chains of narration, you're going to notice all these things. Right? So inshallah, let us keep going. Okay, go ahead.
Sharaf ad-Din Munawi, with whom he read Quranic, exegesis, Taqi ad-Din Shamani in Hadith and the sciences of Arabic, and others. He traveled to gain sacred knowledge to Damascus, the Hijaz, Yemen, India, Morocco, and the lands south of Morocco, as well as to centers of learning in Egypt such as Mahala, Dumya, and Fayoum.
Remember, I told you this concept of a rihla fi talib al-ilm, traveling to seek knowledge. Whoever doesn't know should ask. Whoever doesn't find a teacher should travel, right? You notice that, and Asuyuti's habit was that he would study with one teacher till he exhausts that teacher, then he would go to another one. And among his teachers were men and great women. He learned from men and women, both. And his teachers went up to the hundreds of teachers. Now, go ahead.
When he reached 40 years of age, he abandoned the company of men for the solitude of the garden of El Mikyas, by the side of the Nile, avoiding his former colleagues as though he had never known them, and it was here that he authored most of his nearly 600 books and treatises.
At 40 years old, he goes into khalwa. So he's 19, he's a scholar of fiqh, he's doing all these books until he's 40, he goes into solitude. Who does that remind you of? Similarly, they had a life like that. An earlier scholar that we talk about, and he's in our code. In the code we use, the passcode that we come in with. Who was like that? I want you to see trends. Who did the similar thing? Imam al-Ghazali, right. Imam al-Ghazali reached that high level in knowledge, and then Imam al-Ghazali went, and how old was Imam al-Ghazali when he did that? Imam al-Ghazali was around 40 years old. Like 39, 40, he did the same thing. So you would kind of notice that the scholars followed an example as those who were before them. Asuyuti reached this high level at 40. Now let's get to know Allah. Leave all this dunya and let's start preparing to go towards Allahu Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Subhanallah. Naam, go ahead.
Wealthy Muslims and princes would visit him with offers of money and gifts, but he put all of them off, and when the Sultan requested his presence a number of times, he refused. Blessed with success in his years of solitude, it is difficult to name a field in which Suyuti did not make outstanding contributions.
Now here I want you to notice something. Asuyuti was Ash'ari, was Shafi, follow the madhab, was a Sufi, right? Was a Hafiz of Hadith. I want you to pay attention to this. So everything that we talk about, Ash'ari Maturidi, following one of the four schools, right? Following the way of Tasawwuf, being a Hadith master, all of those things we're talking about, we see it in these great scholars, right? spirituality. All of that is there. Mastery, reaching the level of ijtihad, which we talked about earlier. And now we're going to talk about his contribution to the Islamic literary legacy, his works, what he left behind, and how the ummah after him are relying on his works. Now we're going to go through some of his books. Now,
Among them, his 10-volume hadith work, Jami al-Jawami, the collection of collections.
and here he has this collection of collection is a collection of two books, his Al-Jami al-Saghir and Al-Jami al-Kabir. It is one of the largest hadith collections available. Asuyuti, in this book, his intent was to collect all of the available hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in its time in one book. So he has more than Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi in his book, right? This book is all full of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which shows you his vast knowledge of the field of hadith, that he collected all of those hadith and he didn't have a computer. He didn't have Google. He didn't have none of that in his time. All that was mind and research, handwritten manuscripts, knowing the works of the scholars, preserving all of that. So he put one of the largest collections available. That's in hadith. In riwayah, just narration of hadith. That's one book. Go ahead.
His Quranic exegesis, Tafsir al-Jalalain, the commentary of the two Jalals, of which he finished the second half of an uncompleted manuscript by Jalaluddin Mahali in just 40 days.
Tafsir al-Jalalain, the tafsir of the two Jalals, and this is available in English. I would suggest you get it. It has some errors that need to be corrected in it, but the book overall for common people, for beginners in Quranic studies and learning the tafsir of the Quran, it is a good beginner's book, and everyone starts with that book. Usually in your studies, you're going to read Tafsir al-Jalalain when you start to learn about tafsir of the Quran. His book is probably the most famous summarized commentary of the Quran available in the Islamic world and used the most. Asuyuti wrote that. He has a bigger one, which is like 7 or 8 volumes, which is all narrations of hadith and on the verses of the Quran. Asuyuti. So he has that small book, and then he has a bigger one in Tafsir al-Quran. And both of those books are major references when one wants to study Tafsir al-Quran. One day, when this pandemic ends, inshallah, and you could visit us at one of our seminars in Atlantic City, I'll show you all these books, right? All of these books, because sometimes the visual is much better than hearing it. When you actually see it, right? When you see what is involved, it's much easier to comprehend. So may Allah lift this pandemic so we can get together and really do studying in person. Now,
his classic commentary on the sciences of hadith, Taqrib al-Rawi fi Sharh Taqrib al-Nawawi. Taqrib al-Rawi fi Sharh Taqrib al-Nawawi. The training of the hadith transmitter and exegesis of Nawawi's the facilitation, and many others. A giant among contemporaries.
Taqrib al-Rawi is among the most famous books in the science of hadith and learning about the types of hadith and the way to narrate hadith and the men of hadith. Taqrib al-Rawi is the most famous latter book in that subject. And it is the last book you would probably study as a detailed study when you study the field of hadith. So you have smaller books. That book, Tadrib al-Rawi, is an explanation of Taqrib, of the book At-Taqrib by Imam al-Nawawi, which was a summary of another book that Imam al-Nawawi wrote called Irshad al-Tulab, which was a summary of the most famous book, the Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah. So I want you to see this sequence of how our scholars from each generation wrote. So Ibn Salah, he wrote his famous introduction in the science of hadith, and he died in around 643, so the middle of the 6th century. Then later, Imam al-Nawawi came, who died in the year 676, and he summarized that book into a book called Irshad al-Tulab, and it's in the science of hadith. Then Imam al-Nawawi summarized that book to another book called At-Taqrib, meaning to make it close, to make it more understandable. And then Asuyuti came later, a couple hundred years later, and he wrote an explanation on that Taqrib by Nawawi called Tadrib al-Rawi, and it is the most studied book when you want to go to the details of the science of hadith. So everyone who's in that field studies the book of Asuyuti. If you're really in that field, you're going to study his books. Now, notice that. So I said it's a major work. That means you're going to be studying the book of an Ash'ari, you're going to be studying the book of a Sufi, you're going to be studying the book of someone who followed the madhab, and you can't do without it if you're going to talk about the subject. You can't even talk about the field if you ain't studied his book. It's not an adequate, it's incomplete research. So if you're talking about the science of hadith and you have no reference to Tadrib al-Rawi for Asuyuti, your conversation is deficient. That shows you his level. You can't talk about the subject without having some reference to his work. That's how important it is in the field of hadith. Also, which is not mentioned here, is his famous book, Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. And I'll put it, Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. I'm trying to get you somewhere. Just hang in there. Be patient with me. Right? Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran is the most famous book in learning the science of the Quran. It was written by Asuyuti. So anyone who talks about the Quran, so we got his books in tafsir. So his book in tafsir, Tafsir Jalalain, Dur al-Manthur, right? That's in tafsir. And then when you talk about the knowledge related to the Quran, the different sciences and different aspects of the Quran, his book Al-Itqan fil Ulum al-Quran is the most relied upon book in that field. Anyone who talks about the Quran seriously must talk about Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran by Asuyuti, right? And all of our chains of narration in these sciences the main ones go back to Asuyuti. And now Asuyuti, which is not mentioned here, Asuyuti in hadith is among those narrators who relate through his route to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. But I want to show you something. How serious were those in training those students? That Asuyuti's father, he went to Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and he took his son Asuyuti when he was 2 years old. Look how serious they were. 2 years old, he used to take him to the session of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani to hear hadith. And he used to write for his little son the chains of narration of Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. To later, Asuyuti would become a link to Al-Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. That's deep. They were serious, right? So if we study our asanid, you'll see sometimes there's the direct relating from Asuyuti to Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. This is some serious stuff. When we talk about this, now you'll get, when we talk about people whose modern day groups, right, talking about hadith, come on, you're not serious. You're talking about dwarfs challenging mountains or giants. It's a big difference. And then you mean they had all this knowledge, all these fields of studies, and they didn't know the proper belief in Allah? Listen to what is being said. They had all this knowledge. They knew all these sciences. They related from the greatest scholars of their time, right? We see the teachers. We see the levels of the scholars they related from. And then you tell me they didn't understand what to believe about Allah, which is the first obligation in the religion. I want you to think about that, right? But if they don't tell us none of this stuff, we won't even know how preposterous such a statement is. Oh, he had mistakes in his aqidah. Huh? You mean he knew all this stuff, which you don't even know a tenth of it, but he didn't know how to properly believe in Allah? Everything the religion calls for, he had, you don't, but he don't know how to believe in Allah. I want you to think about that. Really, like, ponder on what is being said to us. Right? Ponder on that. Really, really put that and think about it. So some of you who ask me why I'm so hard on these different groups, that's why. Think about what they're telling you. Like, put it in your mind. They were all misguided in Aqidah, following madhabs, deviant Sufis. And everything they wrote, you rely on. You can't talk about the religion without talking to them, talking about them and their works. You can't reach the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except that you go through their route. But they were ignorant in belief. I want you to think about that. But if I never show you all these things, and I'm talking about all around them, above them, contemporary with them, after them, were all great scholars. Look at the time of Asuyuti. Who was his contemporaries? Right? Al-Hafiz al-Sakhawi, the great master of hadith, who wrote his book, Fath al-Mughith Bishar Alfiyat al-Hadith, which is Alfiyat al-Iraqi, who was the Sheikh of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great master of hadith, who wrote that 1,000-line poetry book in hadith. As-Sakhawi, he wrote a commentary on that called Fath al-Mughith, which was one of the most reliable commentaries, the most precise commentaries on that book. Asuyuti wrote an Alfiya on that and a commentary on that book as well. He had As-Sakhawi, Al-Hafidh As-Sakhawi. And contemporary with Asuyuti was Shaykh al-Islam, Zakaria al-Ansari, that master scholar and jurist and master mind of Islamic sciences. Ash'ari, Sufi, Sakawi, Ash'ari, Sufi, Shafi. That was his contemporary. That's his group. Were students of his Sheikh Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who was in the time of Jalaluddin al-Bukhini, Alamuddin al-Bukhini, right? Ibn Hajar al-Haythami, Zainuddin al-Iraqi, Waliyuddin, Jalaluddin al-Iraqi. This was the environment, and countless that we don't have to name. These are just famous people. and none of them know about belief. None of them knew that Sufism was bid'ah. None of them knew that you don't have to follow a madhab. Think about that. Think about what is being said to you. But they'll tell us, oh, this is too deep. They don't need to know all this stuff. And I want to show you something. And I was telling my wife this last night. You know, if you let a lie go on for so long, people will believe it's true. Right? I'm going to give you an example. We talk about the Native Americans. They living on reservations. They were the original inhabitants of the land. They were wiped out with disease and things. The land was taken. Now they almost as if they don't exist. They were the really, but you would think that this was, America was always like this. It wasn't. We hijacked this land. Not we, but, you know, those guys, right? They hijacked the land and tortured and butchered and plundered the land. But now it's as if America only started 200 and something years ago, and this land was a land of savages and animals before that. I want you to think about that. It happens. We're watching it. We see how to wipe out, write a whole new history. They doing that in the name of religion. They did it in the name of religion. And today, most of you go to Saudi Arabia and see that doctrine they got there and think that's how it was. Do you realize 250 years ago, it wasn't like that? The leaders of Mecca and Medina were Ash'ari, Sufi, following madhabs. They slaughtered them and took the Kaaba and took the Medina and Mecca. They did that with bloodshed. That wasn't just we were great scholars, and no, they killed people, slaughtered Muslim scholars and children and babies. Study the history. But now, that's the official version of Islam. A'udhu billah. I just want you to think about it. So, the idea of telling you don't study history, don't study all this stuff, it ain't important, is a way to deceive you. And if you don't know your history, then you're bound to repeat the mistakes that happen. If you don't know your scholars, you're bound to follow people who are not even scholars. And you notice that's the trend. You got people that saying, we don't need to listen to no scholars. We can do our own thing. We are our own scholars. But where are you going with this? Where are you going with this? We do it ourselves. Really? So we don't need our chains of narration go out the window. We're just going to go with us just doing whatever we want. Really? That sounds familiar, and it doesn't sound like our Islamic history. It sounds like a modern heretical movement in the name of Islam. That sounds very familiar. Throw away the yellow books of Islamic law and let us do whatever we want. Don't be fooled. Allah is opening the door for us. Right? And we need to keep that door open. Really. We need to keep that door open. Yesterday, I watched a video of Imam Naim Abdullah. He is now teaching a muqtasar in Maliki fiqh called Al-Akhdari, right? Matan Al-Akhdari. It's a little basic book, like Sulam al-Tawfiq. Sulam al-Tawfiq is a little bit more detailed than that book, but it's a similar concept in Maliki fiqh. And yesterday he did a lesson. I think it was yesterday. I know I saw it yesterday, and I shared it on my wall, and it's on his wall on his Facebook page, as well as mine. And he was reading the introduction of the book. And it's a book of fiqh. But he noticed that the author, Imam al-Akhdari, the first thing he said was what? That the first obligation on the mukallaf is to know about Allah, to have a correct belief, before he talked about fiqh. To have a correct belief. That's a Maliki scholar. He's not Shafi'i, right? But he's Maliki. He's Sufi. He's Ash'ari in creed. And these are the most famous beginner books in the school. You notice they're saying something, the Shafi'i is saying something, the Hanafis are saying that, the noble of the Hanabila, same thing. All those scholars who are masters, when you get to know about them, you see. May Allah help you, Na'il. Maliki is my madhab. La hawla wa la quwwata. I'm joking. Now I'm messing with you. No, really, history is important. Knowing about scholars is important. Because if we don't know about scholars, right, and we don't know about history, you know, it's going to say, you know, we don't need to have this rich tradition that was designed to preserve our religion. We don't need it. And this is a big mistake. May Allah make us savannah. I promise tomorrow I'm going to finish these 8 categories, inshallah. But there's a lot of things we got to work on. And I'm committed to be here, inshallah ta'ala. So just, you know, you get to the day that people say, we don't got to learn this, it's not important, all this stuff is not important. No, just we basic Muslims. Yeah. That's a good way to deceive people. Keep them dumb. Keep them ignorant. Keep them unlearned. So you can control them. Because if they get knowledge, watch out. They're not going to follow you. If they learn, they're not going to follow you. And guess what? You shouldn't care if they follow you. You want them to be on the straight path. It's not about following you. Right? We should be careful with this. We want us to learn. We want future generations of scholarly people. We want to be reading the biography of our own children at the same rank and the same level. We want to read, even if we don't live to see it, when those books are written about our children, we wanted to say the same thing, if not better. Not, inshallah, we trying to save them to stay in the deen. La ilaha illallah. No, we want them to be experts in the religion and experts in the worldly sciences and experts in building civilization. We don't want to just say, oh, inshallah, they still Muslim. La ilaha illallah. They have to be Muslim. That's not a prize. They don't have a choice. They cannot die as a non-Muslim. So that's not a prize. They need to learn the religion. And we need to learn it so we can teach it. And they need to convey it to the next generations and the next generations. And we need to be thinking what it's going to look like 500 years if we live that long. Or if people live that long. What is Islam going to look like 500 years from now in America? What is the inheritance of our children? Right? Both worldly and religiously and spiritually. What does their legacy look like and what are we leaving for them? Jahil bid-din, ignorance of the religion? La yajuz, it's not permissible. All right, I'm sorry. Again, please forgive me. But may Allah help us. I'm trying to, I know that was a lot, but memorize all those names. Memorize all those names. All right, I'll take a quick few questions. And tomorrow, I promise, I'm going to do these 8 sciences of the religion, so we can go back to Sulam al-Tawfiq. Quick question, where are we at in Sulam al-Tawfiq? Let's see if we're following along. Where are we at in Sulam al-Tawfiq? In the ladders of success, where are we at? What section? Come on, come on, come on. Where are we at in the ladders of success? Where are we at in this book? Tell me, inshallah. Because we're moving around, but you got to know where we at. Where we at in this book? Where did we leave off? Because we have to pick up from there. We are going to start zakat. Fatima. Shaykhatuna. Our shaykha. MashaAllah. You're getting it. Now, Malika, we passed funeral. We finished that. We're on that zakat. We finished the Kitabul Salat. Now we're on Kitabul Zakat. So we will be starting when we go back to that after we do those 8 sciences quickly. We're going to go to page 62. What I'm trying to do is equip you to know where we got to go, what we're doing, and we're going and where we got to go. So you just got to keep following. I'm teaching you how to study traditionally. And we're going to go forward to come back, right? Usually when we were studying with our teachers, we came with empty cups, so they didn't have to do all this stuff. They just say, learn this, learn this, learn this, and then we build up. But we got to go the opposite way now because people come with their cups overflowing with mistakes and errors. And because of that, they don't listen, right? You know how many messages I get from people daily telling me what I should be teaching? And they don't even know their Fard Ayn, but they always telling me about some details, some other stuff. I mean, and I understand, but that's a bad situation. So we got to get a certain amount of knowledge to realize this is where we're trying to get. Now let's come back here where we really at, and let's work ourselves to that. So that's my method of, so when you wonder why is he going into all these details? Because I got to clean our minds up. We got to clean up the stuff that's all in there so we can put good stuff in there. But if you got all that stuff, it's going to be a source of blocking people from learning. So instead of learning the arkan of prayer, they talking about what's your dalil. So now you got to tell them the different types of dalil and what types of dalil and how is it related to usul al-fiqh and this and that, so they can go learn the 17 integrals of prayer. If you don't take them through all that, they're not going to learn the 17 integrals of prayer. They're going to say, man, I was reading fiqh sunnah and it said, you know. So we gotta teach us how to learn first. And then once we learn to learn, then we can go through the basics and the essential matters and then build and build and build. But we got to learn the why. That's just us. I'm not doing nothing if I don't know why. I'm not listening to nobody else. That's our default position. So if we could change our ways, it's easier to teach. Great. So if we have questions, but no, we should do a class on the history describing how this Wahhabi Islam took over. No, we need to learn our history in general, how these things work, so we can understand where it went wrong and what we need to do to fix it. Okay. Let me take some of these questions. They're closest to me. So where they at? All right, let me see. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for taking up all your time. That's what happens when you get excited. Why do we call the science secular or worldly when these sciences are necessary to facilitate Muslims worshiping Allah? I think this word secular is very misleading. Here are just examples. Most Muslims take a plane to make Hajj. Many Muslims rely on automobiles to get to the Masjid for Jummah. Many Muslims receive hip replacements to allow them to make salat again. Okay, that's a good question. Traditionally, so I can answer your question. Traditionally, that's your question, so it takes up a lot of space, right? So you'll see it. Traditionally, when we look at ulum, sciences, different fields of study, in our Islamic tradition, there are different types of sciences. You have religious science, ulum al-shar'iyya, so they're directly related to sacred knowledge. Then you have sciences that relate to the universe, right? They're studied for that purpose. There are sciences that relate to the development of the world, like those you're mentioning, agriculture, engineering. In the traditional books of Islamic study, the people study all that stuff. They're just called different things. But why is all of that studied? As you said, we have al-ibadah, worship, right? That's your relationship with Allah. That falls under religious sciences, how to worship. Then you have the aspect of al-imara, to take care and develop the world. That's why the worldly or secular sciences are needed. And we as successors on the earth, khulafa al-ard, that's the position of the human being. We gotta worship Allah and we gotta develop and take care of the world. That's a responsibility of the human being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made sciences to fulfill each responsibility. Is that more clear? So in the sense, even the worldly sciences are designed to fulfill an obligation from Allah. But then some of those sciences are personal obligations, which is ibadat, all of us got to do it. And some of them are communal obligations, which only some of us got to do it, right? So in the religious sciences and the ulum of, in the religion, the sciences, there are different aspects, right? Like you got the sciences of languages, right? So when we expand, I'm giving you these 8 Islamic sciences. When we expand, that's going to go up to 20 or 30 or 40 different sciences, right? When I start talking, but we at levels. Right now, we're just talking about worship, ibadat. But we got to take care of the world, as you said. If no one does engineering or agriculture or medicine, medicine is not a religious science in of itself, but it's an essential science in maintaining the world. If nobody does that, everybody is sinful. It's a fard kifaya. If nobody does it, everybody is sinful. Everybody. Everybody who knows that it's not being fulfilled is a sinner until it's fulfilled. So don't think in any way in Ahl Sunnah, in traditional Sunni Islam, that any of that is undermined. It all has its value. Do you want to give you an example? Sheikh Samir, one of my teachers, he's a doctor, but he's a master scholar too, of Quran, of Hadith, of fiqh. But he learned those sciences first, his religious sciences. Then he went and learned worldly sciences, which happen to be medicine. And now he has a clinic in Damascus. He been had it. I mean, he has a clinic and he also teaches the religion in the university. So he's a doctor and he teaches in the Islamic university at the graduate level. And he teaches in the morning Quran recitation at the highest levels in Damascus. And he travels all over the world, Europe, America, South Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, teaching and benefiting people. But he did all that, and it's like, and he's a doctor, internal medicine, a specialist. And I got to ask him, I got to call him to ask him, can I tell y'all his story? Because I think it's very motivational, but it's his personal story. So without his permission, I won't mention it. But I think it's very motivational, his story particularly. and the way his father and his parents were with him. And there's a reason why, and you see the result, and we need to emulate that. So I would say to you, yes, those religious sciences, we learn early. So by the time you're a teenager, you're busy done with that. And then you're pursuing what? Imaratul ard, taking care of the world. So then you go into those worldly sciences. But you're supposed to take care of religious sciences first, because that's a personal obligation. Then you move to the communal obligation. So it's no contradiction. It's a contradiction when we don't realize Islam properly and the functions of the human being within the sacred, within the revelation. We have more than one aspect to do, right? It's haram to ruin the world. We have to take care of the world. So we have to take on all the sciences that are necessary to maintain the world. We have to do it. If we don't do it, we're sinful. That's Islam. Inshallah. And Allah knows best. But when we go on, I'm going to talk about those sciences too. From Islamic side, like from our books, to show you this is what we do. Any other questions? He said I'm stealing my families. All right. Can you speak on the difference between Imam Shafi's two risalas? Imam Shafi, these are two different sciences you mentioned. Risala is not a book of fiqh. A risala of Imam Shafi is a book of usul al-fiqh. In fact, it was the first book authored in detail about usul al-fiqh, was written by Imam Shafi. So that's his risala. That's the methodology of the fundamentals of fiqh. So that does not have anything to do with fiqh. That's usul al-fiqh. Imam Shafi wrote two books in al-fiqh. One is called Kitab al-Hujjah, and one is called Kitab al-Umm. Kitab al-Hujjah was when Imam Shafi was in Iraq, and his ijtihad in Iraq. When he moved to Egypt after Iraq, where he died in Egypt, he established some new ijtihad in some issues, and that is he wrote in his book Kitab al-Umm, right? So that was Imam Shafi. So you have Kitab al-Hujjah in Iraq, which is al-Madhab al-Qadim, the old madhab of al-Shafi, and al-Umm, Kitab al-Umm, that was mentioned in Egypt, which is called al-Madhab al-Jadid, the new madhab. In the Shafi'i fiqh, most of the rulings of the Shafi'i school is according to al-Madhab al-Jadid, the new madhab of al-Shafi. However, there are certain cases or masail in Shafi'i fiqh where the dominant opinion is from al-Madhab al-Qadim, the old madhab of Imam Shafi. So that it is so, but al-Risala is usul al-fiqh. It is not related to al-fiqh. In al-fiqh, we're talking about those two books. So it's not the Risalas. The difference between Imam Shafi and Malik relates to usul. And you would study the Risala, it's translated in English, right? You'll get to see the usul of Imam Shafi, and then you need to understand the books of usul in the Maliki fiqh. And then you will understand the difference between the two. But it's a detailed discussion. And when you talked about as-sadl, in the Shafi'i school, putting the hands between the navel and the chest is sunnah, it's not fard. So if one in the Shafi'i school pray with one's hands to the side, it is valid. In any prayer, it's valid. Placing the hands in the location in the Shafi'i school is a sunnah, it's not a fard. You notice when we studied the 17 integrals, it didn't say anything about, it said standing. It didn't say nothing about putting your hands anywhere, because that's sunnah. Standing is fard. Where you place the hands is sunnah in the Shafi'i school. I hope that helps you. I mean, because it's a detailed question, right? But that's a summarize to show you where to find the answers to your questions. Okay, there's no more questions. Yep, that's it. And so really, I want to go into all these things, right? I mean, but we got to finish so we get our Fard Ein done. We get some stuff. All right. You said I'm missing your point. I wish I could see you. What's wrong with your eyes? You don't see me? Got you. Right now, let me stop. You mean you wish I could see you? Yeah, I'm missing your point. I don't know your point. Maybe you can call me later and explain what you're saying, because I'm not getting it. Excuse me. And you know I'm not that smart. And I got the Apollo, what they call that cane thing. They're telling me you've been on too long. Get off the phone. Get off the computer. You're wasting the people's time. I love you all. May Allah reward you. Inshallah, we'll come back tomorrow. Please share the video, because Facebook, they have a way of blocking people from learning. They got that, what is it called, algorithms or whatever. So the more you share, the more the video will be able to get out to people. So please do that. Okay, tomorrow ask me this question, Tenware, preserve it. So tomorrow we'll come in and let me answer that question. I understand what was being said. All right, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi